Thank you, James, and a very good afternoon to you all. Thank you very much for being in the session today. I'm, like James has just said, I'm Opie, and I'm one of the founding partners at Maxica Consulting. We specialize in delivering change for the sector. Hopefully there'll be a little bit about that later on, but I think what you're particularly interested in hearing is UEA's journey to cloud, SITS Cloud. Steve, would you like to do a quick introduction of yourself as well, please?
So, can you hear me, Opie?
Absolutely, we can hear you loud and clear, Steve.
Good, we're off to a good start. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Steve Kirk, and I'm the Associate Director and Digital Lead for UEA.
Fantastic. Steve, I think it'll be great to kind of just, in terms of just setting the context for this journey, kind of for this story, I think it's just to help us get our bearings. Steve, I think it'll be useful just talk a little about UEA, what the university is like, what the context, for this particular migration was, and then we can kind of get into some of the key lessons and developments that evolved as the project went on. Do you want to just say a few words about that?
Yeah, thanks, Opie. So just in terms of UEA's background, so we were founded by Royal Charter in '63. We've got roughly 17,000 students and approximately 3,500 members of staff. So it gives you a bit of a contextual frame for the talk. So just in terms of scene setting, Opie, so I joined UEA back in March of 21 with no prior experience working in higher education. I've experienced being a student, but that was it. And I was tasked with overseeing UEA's infrastructure and services, and it's been a bit of a challenge to say the least. So when I arrived, I inherited an infrastructure that was largely siloed and out of date, unsupported. We had unpatched operating systems and applications, no asset inventory, service management issues. I could go on, but hopefully you get the picture. So the situation presented significant cyber security challenges and operational risk, coupled with considerable technical debt as well. And at the same time, the external cyber threat to higher education was increasing, and this was adding to my concerns, which I'm sure many of you can relate to too. The infrastructure's condition also caused service instability, which eroded trust between IT and the wider business. And we were stuck firefighting rather than trying to align with IT delivery with UEA's strategic goals. Oh, and on top of all of that, I'm about to head into something called clearing for the first time on an unsupported platform. So, how bad can it be? So it was clear that maintaining the status quo was not going to be an option, and something had to change. And UEA had recognised the need for transformation, and we'd worked with Opie and Maxica to build a business case and secured council approval for a 6-year programme to modernise IT services, and the first 3 years of that was focused on fixing foundational issues. So addressing SITS was always part of our long-term strategic roadmap, with plans to migrate to the cloud, whatever that would look like at a future date. However, significant supplier pressure disrupted those plans. So as we approached clearing in 21, we found ourselves on an unsupported platform. So seeking a solution, we requested an extended support agreement from our supplier, which we'd done successfully in the past, I've been told. However, on this occasion, Tribal declined and stated that support would only be provided if we agreed to adopt their SaaS agreement and upgraded to a supported version of SITS by early next year. So hopefully, Opie, that sets the scene for our SITS cloud migration.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Steve. And I think, what's really interesting from a UEA context was we'd kind of been working with them for a number of years, and we had been doing some work with colleagues in IT, but also working with the business to try and get a sense for what were the core priorities of the university. And, as best laid plans and all that, there was a clearly well-defined program, with a roadmap and, kind of resources mapped to that. And you kind of just get this side swiping that comes from the SITS migration. And so we realized quite quickly that UEA needed to migrate to cloud to respond to some of the, pressure that was coming from Tribal themselves. So the digital transformation program, which UEA had already initiated by this point, essentially had to undergo a significant refactoring. But what was also more interesting was that we were starting from a base where the technology wasn't in the place where we would expect it to be. And I think, Steve, there were some incredible, important steps that we took when we thought about what the upgrade path, for SITS was going to be. Can you just say a little bit about that?
In terms of the upgrade path, OP, sorry, you broke
Yes,
up.
please. Yeah, in terms of the upgrade path, yes.
Yeah, so the agreement with Tribal, it necessitated a double upgrade, which was not in our immediate plan. So we first had to get to a version before clearing, 10.2 before clearing in the next year, and then later we had to go to 10.4, which was the foundation for cloud migration. So the business impact of these on-premise upgrades was considerable, largely due to the state of the infrastructure as when I set the scene, and it caused significant disruption before we even began to migrate into the cloud. And needless to say is that this experience left a lasting impression on UEA.
Yeah. And so, we did a lot of work just thinking about the upgrade path before we started. And then, of course, it was kind of push the button and all systems go. So, Steve, what were some of the key actions that we took? And you wanted to highlight the contract sign-off point in particular being important. Do you want to just talk about that?
Yes, thanks, Opie. So we knew this kind of supplier pressure and rapid timeline required a strong legal foundation. So before we signed any agreement, we engaged specialist legal counsel, a company called Clyde & Co of London, to review the contract we've been given. So their expertise ensured that the contract worked in UEA's favour, and we were able to secure things such as service credits, tribal indemnity for UEA, clearer termination rights, defined limits for liability, and the most important thing for me was a right to modify the agreement that prevented Tribal from altering key terms post-signature. So that proactive approach was critical for mitigating risks and ensuring we retained as much control and protection as possible during what was a highly pressured procurement process. And from a personal perspective, I cannot stress enough the importance of engaging expert legal counsel for any contracts of this magnitude.
Yeah, and I think, one of the key points here was, of course, UEA was doing some of this for the first time. And it's always, for many universities, we're kind of coming from a place where much of our systems are on-prem. Moving into the whole kind of SaaS space really requires careful thinking about some of the contractual terms that you will be exposed to. And I think this was one of the very first key lessons. It wasn't even a technology thing. It really was just thinking about what are the contractual restrictions we're going to be under. But then we started to think about the technology things. And, we started thinking about how do we design this, for delivery to make sure we could get it right the first time. And I think, Steve, there were some key lessons here.
Yeah, so as you know, Opie, from the feedback provided, so Maxica was pivotal in terms of UEA 6 cloud migration. So they're able to provide project management of a service in terms of delivery, which has allowed us to flexibly scale resources on and off, address skills gaps as they came up, and deliver the projects on time, which was most important. The team worked closely with UEA staff to build stronger relationships and building internal expertise so that the teams could manage the new cloud platform. So the Maxica's technical solutions team played a key role in addressing the technical debt. So they provided tailored consulting for integration strategies, data management, and for generally reducing risk. So this expertise was especially crucial during the challenging double upgrade that I mentioned earlier in terms of pre-cloud migration. So ultimately, the combined efforts of us together transformed what was arguably a tactical response driven by an external environment into a more strategic outcome, which was important.
Yeah, and of course, a student record system is sort of at the heart, really, of much of what we do with our students. And it kind of needed to be able to talk to other systems. We had to take some very interesting steps when we're thinking about the integration strategy and the data strategy, and it's kind of listed here deliberately. Steve, can you just reflect on why we kind of had to do things in this way?
Yeah, so some of the more eagle-eyed among you may notice that these are perhaps back to front. So why on earth would you pile into integration strategies before you defined your data strategy, Steve? So this was largely down to the time pressure from our supplier. So we had to begin work on SITS integrations before we'd completed UEA's data strategy, and that's a sequence we would not have chosen. So typically, as you all know, a robust data strategy ensures that the integrations are aligned with defined governance and usability principles. You try and avoid inefficiencies wherever possible, and you reduce the long-term risks. To address the immediate challenges we had, we agreed with Tribal at some additional cost to implement a read-only version of the original SITS database for integrations classified as low risk and crucial for business continuity. So this approach allowed the business to continue operating while giving us time to fully investigate and address those integrations at a later date. So while it was not ideal, this compromise underscored the importance of a clear data strategy and the need to resist external pressures that force tactical over strategic decisions. So Maxica's support was instrumental in helping stabilise these integrations and mitigate the risk during that really condensed timeline.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the lessons for us, as Maxica working with UEA in this space was it was really helpful for both parties, if you like, to really have a clear understanding of the constraints, the university was under, and what were those core things that needed to be done to support clearing such a critical time, for the university. And that meant that we were able to take a risk-based approach to thinking about how we did a kind of limited integration approach without unnecessarily over-compromising on the data strategy side, which we were able to revisit later. But Steve, I think just a couple of other points on the capability side. I think you wanted to make.
Sure. So Maxica support for UEA was largely twofold. So they helped develop the internal team's skills to manage and exploit the cloud services, while providing the flexibility to deliver the right expertise at critical moments. So the project management as a service, as I've mentioned, it kept the projects on track, while the technical solutions team addressed the technical debt and helped stabilise the integrations. An essential part of this was ensuring a robust testing strategy and testing team was in place, something we didn't have at UEA. So testing with stakeholders for us, it went beyond just ensuring functionality. Crucially, it was about building trust and solid relationships out in the business. So through partnership with Maxica, we were able to develop a thorough testing approach, which helped ensure that integrations were secure and functional. And equally important, it gave UEA stakeholders the confidence that the cloud migration was proceeding smoothly. So this relationship building aspect of testing played a crucial role in fostering collaboration and trust between IT and the business, so enabling smoother transitions and a more successful outcome, to be frank. So we were able to take the business on the migration journey with us. And the feedback I had from stakeholders out in the business is perhaps for the first time in a long time, it felt very much like we were in this together. It wasn't IT doing this to the business.
So Steve, I mean, these types of presentations can feel kind of a little bit, we kind of have the glossy picture, but in the trenches, things kind of get quite difficult from time to time. But I think the great thing, Steve, was at the end, we did manage, I think, to deliver some real success, and we achieved a first time migration to SITS Cloud, which I think was quite remarkable given the challenges and the real constraint time pressures we were under, being able to do that at the very first go. Steve, I think there were some successes that you were quite keen just to highlight. Do you want to just talk a little bit about some of those?
Yeah, so the system was back in support first and foremost, which it hadn't been for a while. And ultimately we got through our first clearing this year on the cloud platform, and unofficially there was a collective holding of breath as we went through that process, having arguably given away control of one of our core business processes to an entity that, I won't go any further, but we were successful, we got through it. The system's back in support. User satisfaction and employee engagement were up as a result of the engagement. We'd managed to simplify the end user's life. We'd stripped out a lot of, for those who know, the full fat SITS client, replacing it with eVision. We managed to strip out some costs as well by doing that. Employee engagement was up, largely due to the inclusive testing work we did with the business. They engaged with us. We were now within a structured service framework that, importantly, I could hold a supplier accountable to. We hadn't had that before in terms of performance because it was all internally hosted and run. Our integrations were successful on the whole. We still have some big challenges because we're still finalising our data strategy. So some of the integration work was tactical. We introduced, to be honest, some technical debt in terms of a risk approach that we were comfortable to carry for a year or two while we sorted out some bigger problems. And for the first time in quite a while, we were cyber secure specifically with a SITS infrastructure. So we'd gone from, I think the last count was something like 26 individual servers and a big complex spaghetti mess, to a service we were consuming. One of the things we also took as part of the SaaS agreement with Tribal is they offer a security offering, a SOC that wraps around their service. So that was something that we wouldn't have been able to spin up so quickly, and even given the costs arguably as cheaply as we had with that agreement around SITS.
Yeah, so Steve, thank you very much. I mean, we've gone through this journey in a really, this has been a whistle-stop tour, I guess, of the journey. But Steve, just if you could kind of just summarize very quickly, what would be the key takeaways you want people to have if they are kind of considering a SITS migration to cloud in terms of the lessons that we learned together through this?
Okay, so I was reflecting on this last night, Ope, and I pulled out, there were 6 main things for me. So quickly, and everybody's journey is different. This is just what I pulled out top of memory from a few years ago. So number 1, legal counsel for me is non-negotiable. So always involved experienced legal counsel when signing high stakes contracts. This ensures that the risks are mitigated and the terms work in your favour. Number 2 is testing builds trust. As I've said, testing with our stakeholders isn't just about functionality, it was about building trust in that relationship. Number 3, data strategy first, as you'd expect. So establishing a clear data strategy before diving into the integration work. And if that's not feasible, proceed with caution, my friend, proceed with caution. Number 4, understanding and documenting integrations. If you understand them and document them, it prevents surprises during migration. We didn't, and we had a few surprises. Number 5, evidence the business benefits. So before migrating to the cloud, clearly define the risk mitigations and the business benefits you're expecting. And importantly, plan how you're going to measure that, so when you get to the end, you can actually evidence it. And then finally, for me, it was leveraging trusted partners like Maxico and like Client Co. So bringing in the experienced partners like Maxico to develop the right strategies, being able to flex resources and skills when you need them, and crucially, being able to have difficult conversations with and bounce ideas off. For me, that, and for UEA, that was the difference between success and failure. And I'll just add, Ope, so having surveyed all my heads of service this week, as they knew I was supposed to be in Newcastle presenting, all of them agree that the relationship that they've built collectively and with Maxico and the expertise that you all brought to the table was key to successfully delivering our cloud migration. We didn't have all the people we needed, we didn't have all the skills. And that's what you brought to the table for us.
Right, thank you very much, Steve, and thank you all very much for listening. I think we can turn to a couple of minutes for questions now.
Thank you, gents. Right, does anybody have any questions? There's a hand straight up at the back.
Thanks, great presentation there. We're currently in the process of kind of refactoring our SITS integrations to something a bit more portable than direct database access, and we're looking at StuTalk. Did you use StuTalk for the integrations with the cloud service, and if so, how did you find it?
Yes, we did. We also talk about a large project. We also implemented MuleSoft for some of the integrations as well to take a more strategic approach to, even though it was still technical debt in terms of integrations. StuTalk filled a really useful niche for us, and we found it, don't underestimate the phrase, it just worked. And that was the use of StuTalk alongside MuleSoft was one of the reasons we were successful in terms of our first clearing, because when all of the integrations came out of the woodwork, because they weren't all documented, just the volume of having to work through them in the time we have, it just wasn't possible. So we had to selectively choose them on business criticality. Some went via StuTalk, some went via MuleSoft.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think the role of integration architecture in that space, I think, cannot be overstated. You really just need to think carefully about specific integration architecture was quite pivotal for UEA.
Any other questions? Gentleman down here.
Just curious about how much re-engineering you did of your SITS installation. Was it just a lift and shift, or did you actually refactor parts of it?
That is a great question. The conversation we initially had, I had with my technical teams, is we're just going to lift and shift. And after they picked themselves off the floor, we picked themselves off the floor. We realised what how much nonsense that was. So our SITs had been in place for arguably 2 decades. We'd had direct access to the database. People had joined UEA, edited things, they'd left, not documented it. We had an immense challenge on our hands. So we had to do quite a bit of re-engineering, yes, to actually get it into the cloud. One of the benefits of moving it into the cloud, or the SaaS offering, however you want to refer to it, is it takes away the ability, in my view, correctly, for people to actually edit the database directly. It pushes you more towards the integration route. But it was a challenge. It definitely was a challenge. And do not underestimate the extent of that, especially if you've had SITs in your environment for a long time.
Great, thank you. Well, we're pretty much up to time there, so I think a round of applause once again for Opie and Stephen.
Thank you.